A U.S. citizen or permanent resident who wants to file for and sponsor an immigrant family member to become a permanent resident, get a green card must demonstrate that they can financially support the sponsored individual for a certain number of years. The goal is to show the U.S. government that the immigrant will not become dependent on public assistance programs, making them ineligible for entry into the country. Often called welfare. Form I-864, or the Affidavit of Support, was created by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, uscis, specifically for this purpose. Watching this video will show you how to fill out the paperwork. How to fill out Form I-864 step by step. These directions apply to the 12th of August 21 edition of Form I-864, the lengthy one. Do you need to draft affidavits for several members of your family at once? After signing Form I-864 and its accompanying documentation, a U.S. sponsor who is bringing in many people, such as a spouse and children using the same Form I-130 petition, may produce copies for each of them. However, only a select group of candidates, such as those whose spouse is a permanent resident of the United States, will be eligible for this. Forms I-130 and I-864 must have been filed individually for each kid if the spouse is a U.S. citizen. Parts 1-5. These fields are self-explanatory, however the sponsor should keep the following in mind when they fill it out. If you filed a family-based petition to obtain the immigrant visa or green card, mark box 1. In section 1 of the form. If you are connected to the immigrant and petitioned for his or her visa or green card on the basis of employment, then you should tick box 1.b. If you do not directly employ the immigrant but control more than 5% of a firm that does, then you should select box 1.c. If you and another person decided to fill out this form as joint sponsors, one of you will need to select box 1.d or 1.e. Whether you are not sure whether two joint sponsors are authorized, you should see an immigration lawyer. The only time there are two joint sponsors is when there are extra family members being sponsored. If the petitioner has passed away, the form must be signed by a substitute sponsor, box 1.f. The immigrant and the substitute sponsor must be linked in some way, and the form must reflect that tie. Only if the principal immigrant has ever sought for a green card or other immigration benefit or been the subject of deportation or removal proceedings will they have a number, alien registration number in Part 2, information about the principal immigrant. Only if the immigrant had previously registered for uscis services online would they have a uscis online account number. The sponsor must provide details about the sponsored relatives in Section 3. Information about the immigrant you are sponsoring. If you are the second joint sponsor, just choose No for question 1. If question 2 pertains to your family, please check the box. A warning appears on the form if you try to add family members who need to be included on their own I-130 petition. If the primary petitioner is an immediate relative, parent, spouse, or minor child of a U.S. citizen, then no other relatives should be included on the Form I-130, and instead a new Form I-130 and I-864 should be filed for each additional relative. Children born in the United States do not need to be included on this form since they are not being sponsored for immigration, but they will be included in the total number of dependents for whom the sponsor must provide financial support elsewhere in the I-864. If you skip past the questions about your family members, you could forget to answer question 29 about the total number of immigrants you are sponsoring. This is the required number for Section 5 of the application. Note that the sponsor's country of residence, question 5 in Part 4, information about you, sponsor, must be the United States in order for the sponsor to be a financial sponsor. If the sponsor resides outside the United States, they may still qualify as a U.S. resident sponsor by demonstrating plans to relocate to the country after the immigrant arrives. Things to do include notifying your employer overseas of your intention to resign, selling your home abroad, relocating to the United States, getting a job, finding a place to live, and enrolling your children in American schools. Only if you answered no to question 3 should you fill out the section asking for a physical address, questions 4. through 4.h. When you sign the affidavit, uscis will ask you to specify in Part 5, sponsor's household size, how many individuals will fall under your financial responsibility. Consequently, it's crucial to avoid double counting. Because some persons may seem to fit into more than one category, it may be difficult to determine how many of each kind of person you are financially responsible for to report in Part 5. However, you'll see that there are separate boxes for folks you are supporting, box 1, and those you are not. All the other boxes. A sponsored spouse, for instance, would be included in the total in box 1. Box 3 should not have a 1 entered into it, since that space is reserved for those who are not being sponsored. Don't add somebody to box 6 until they can prove they have a green card. If you are also signing an affidavit of support for another individual at the same time as this one, that individual should not be included. Chapter 6, Sponsors' Income and Profession. Answers 1, 6. One or more of these must be selected by the sponsor. If option 1 applies to you, please provide your official employment title. Include extra employment information on Part 11 supplemental page if you work for more than 2 employers. If you're retired, uscis wants to know which of your former employers you could be getting retirement benefits from. Otherwise, list your most recent employment. Keep in mind that the earnings presented may not be enough to support the intended immigrant if you are self-employed and have underreported income to U.S. tax authorities in the past. Before the newly reported income is considered as satisfying the standards for sponsorship, you will need to submit an updated tax return with the IRS and your state and pay a penalty. Inquiry number 7. Entering the total income amount from your most recent federal income tax return is the simplest option if you file your taxes as a single individual. Form 1040 or 1040EZ. You may expect no additional scrutiny from uscis if this amount surpasses 125% of the U.S. poverty line for your family size and is supported by tax records, such as a W-2 or Schedule C. When filing joint tax returns, it may be confusing to determine how much of the total income figure really belongs to you and how much to your spouse. This number has to coincide with the one on your W-2 or other tax form. If this figure differs from what appears on your most recent federal income tax return, please provide an explanation on the attached sheet. This is not always the case. In many cases, a sponsor's current yearly income is insufficient, despite the fact that the total income amount on the most recent federal income tax return is not 125% of the poverty line for the family size. Sponsor income such as non-taxable Social Security retirement income, alimony, and child support, for instance, would not be included in total income on the tax form. If so, please provide an explanation and supporting documentation on the supplementary page. It's also possible that the sponsor's financial situation has improved since last year. If you need to depend on it, you may have to speculate on your annual income and provide data to back up your prediction. Pay records demonstrating your income for the preceding 6 months and a letter from your employer detailing your employment with the company, including the business's location and phone number, are required by uscis. Inquiries 8, 22. Sponsors whose individual income falls short of the poverty threshold, but who plan to rely on other family members' incomes should carefully consider these concerns. Unless you are depending only on the income of the immigrant you are sponsoring and that person has no dependents who are emigrating with them, you must select box 21 to indicate that you are relying on the income of household members. Sponsors and members of the sponsored home must enter into a separate agreement utilizing Form I-864A. To avoid submitting a Form I-864A, check box 22 and provide the immigrant's name if the immigrant's income may be utilized. The immigrant must be a member of your household and the immigrant has no dependents immigrating at the same time. Sponsor and household yearly income should be entered in box 20. Inquiries 23, 25. Form 1040 is where you'll find the information uscis requests under the Total Income fields for single filers, 24. A, 24. B, and 24.c. or some version thereof. Those who filed jointly need to figure out what percentage of the total on those lines represents their own individual income. Subsidizing income with assets, Chapter 7. Technically, U.S. sponsors only need to fill out this form if their total income, including that of any other household members, is less than the minimal amount required by the federal poverty guidelines. However, it is recommended to demonstrate as much financial capability as possible if the case is even slightly on the edge. If the sponsor has any assets to include, such as a home, a second vehicle, so long as it runs, or a boat, be sure to deduct any outstanding bills, mortgages, or liens from the total worth. Keep in mind that if the immigrant is the spouse or child of a U.S. citizen sponsor, The value of these assets will be divided by 3 before being utilized to fulfill the poverty guidelines minimum, and by 5 otherwise. If the immigrant cannot meet the poverty guidelines minimum with the sponsor's available income plus 1/3 or 1/5, as applicable of the sponsor's household and all the immigrant's assets, he or she must still submit this affidavit but must also find a joint sponsor. The contract, statement, contact information, declaration, certification, and signature of the sponsor. If the form was filled out by someone else using your information, please indicate so in box 2 and include that person's name. If they are a lawyer or an approved representative, uscis also needs to know that. A person who is not a lawyer but who is legally allowed to represent people in immigration matters. Type your name and the date in box 6.a and your signature in box 6.b. uscis will not accept a stamped or typed signature, or a signature that was duplicated or faxed in any form. To sign on behalf of someone who lacks mental capacity, a legal guardian may do so. Section 9. Sign certification and contact information for the interpreter. Checking box 1.b in Part 8 will require the interpreter to fill up this section. Section 10. Information about the person preparing this affidavit if not the sponsor's contact information, declaration, and signature. If you selected option 2 in Part 8 of the form, the preparer is responsible for filling up this section. When answering question 7.b, attorneys and authorized representatives must specify whether they are acting on behalf of the sponsor just for the purpose of submitting the affidavit of support or for all parts of the immigration case. Chapter 11. Supplemental materials. Use this section to provide details and clarifications that couldn't fit elsewhere in the form. Obtaining legal counsel. Consult an immigration attorney if you have any doubts about your ability to financially support an immigrant, or if you need assistance filling out Form I-864 or any other part of the immigration process.